Introducing health and wellness advocate, veteran international real estate investment expert, author and speaker, Adiel Gorel.
Health tips, fitness tips, nutrition and well-being, world-class experts, all right here on my podcast, The Adiel Gorel Show. Well, we are very fortunate, happy, and blessed today to be able to interview Dr. John Sottery. John and I have known each other for a couple of years. I loved his mind. I loved his incredibly deep knowledge and curiosity. So, see, I have the curiosity. I try to find things. John has the curiosity and the same drive, except he's a scientist. So that's where we can benefit so much from him. So just in a couple of words, Dr. Sottery is a scientist focused on optimizing human health, vitality, and health span, not just lifespan, health span. John doesn't believe in aging normally and has spent the last 30 years understanding cellular aging, chronic disease, and metabolic dysfunction. And he's been identifying breakthrough approaches to optimizing health and vitality. Dr. Sottery translates this deep scientific understanding into programs that help normal people like me to, one, identify their specific root cause health issues by measuring critical biomarkers, and two, go ahead and implement health strategies to dramatically enhance their vitality and target their key issues at a biochemical level. Over the past 39 years, Dr. Sottery's work has resulted in numerous US patents, international patents, scientific presentations, and publications. He's been invited to speak at a number of prestigious scientific conferences around the world: New York, London, Sydney, Cannes, Cleveland, Orlando, and more, and including an invited keynote presentation at the Formula 3 at La Grande Motte, France, chaired by the 1991 Nobel Prize winner, Pierre-Gilles de Gennes. Dr. Sottery has been an expert speaker at the US Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, and has been interviewed by numerous publications, including Scientific American and many others. His educational program across the US, Europe, and Australia, have attracted many participants from more than 16 countries. Dr. Sottery has also authored chapters in Scientific American's Ask the Expert book and the PBS special Life 201 book, which was actually a television show that I created for PBS and invited John to be one of the experts, both on the air, and he put a wonderful chapter in the book. Incredible stuff. So John, thank you for being here, with us today.
Well, Adiel, it's great to be here with you. I always so enjoy our time together, and I'm looking forward to a great discussion today, and hopefully we can help some folks out as well.
I hope so too. So John, you are at a place where I consider you to be an amazing resource. I can't wait till I talk to you. When I knew that we were going to have this interview today, I was already excited because I knew there were some new things that I'm going to learn from you. But if you can take us through the path that led you to this place in your career and your life.
Sure. Well, for me, even as a kid, I was always obsessed with understanding how things worked. And anytime something broke in our house and it was done for, I would take it apart and try to figure out what happened, what broke, what went wrong, and understand it. And my father and my grandfather were both PhD scientists, both PhD chemists. And I guess I had the chemistry gene as well. And, chemistry is the way to understand how the world works, at the most fundamental level. And it just always made sense to me. But I see chemistry as just a tool. I want to study a complex system and really figure it out, both how it's supposed to work, what goes wrong, and then unlike machines, the human body is also trying to repair itself. So I want to understand those repair processes as well, because I want to amp up repair while I'm minimizing damage. You know, I want to grow younger, not older. So, so in my life, I didn't get married until I was 40 years old. And we had our first child. We had 2 children. The second one was born when I was 51. And I thought about it and I said, you know, I'm going to be 70 when I'm driving these kids off to college. And I had always been focused on health and nutrition and longevity, but I tried to take it to the next level because I don't want to be an old man when I'm walking my daughter, you know, down the aisle. So I was born in the 1950s. I'm 61 right now. And I feel good. And I want to, I don't expect to live till I'm 150 years old. But what I do expect is that when, you know, at age 61, I can do things that are hard for 30-year-olds. When I'm 80, I want to be able to do things that are hard for 40-year-olds. I want to keep pushing the envelope. And the trick is, it's never about one thing. You can't get focused on just cardiovascular disease or just mitochondrial health or just arterial calcification or thyroid or diabetes. You really have to dig into every one of those areas, because it's like building a race car. It's not just about the fuel injection technology or the anti-lock brakes or the aerodynamics. You really have to develop expertise in all those areas to create that exceptional race car. So that was maybe more than we needed. I have seen people go through cancer, people that I loved, and I would do anything to avoid that, the chemotherapy, the radiation. And my father had spent the last 30 years of his life dealing with chronic disease, and I know what a nightmare that is as well. So I have deep motivation between my kids and watching what happened with my parents to make the right moves. And, you know, I'm obsessed with it. And then but my job is to understand the complex science, spend the weeks or the months or the years. But then my job is to translate it to make it accessible to normal people, because not everyone is a PhD scientist that wants to read on PubMed for 300 hours a year. So,
right. And this is, I consider this, besides you being a scientist and a chemist and a PhD, I consider one of your superpowers the ability to dive deep and read that 300-page research. You know, I'm one of the normal people. I'm very curious. I want to make my life as, I want to biohack my system, you know, to use a new term. But for you, that's the superpower. You are the guy who was there in the research. So, you know, you and I talked last time, almost a year ago, in the aftermath of doing the PBS show Life 201. And I know that in the past year, someone of your knowledge and caliber and things move. What's new, John? What is new that could be beneficial?
That's a great question. And I guess one of the things there's a couple areas that jump to mind when you say that. One of them is this whole area of senescent cells. And senescent cells are really interesting because when you're young, they save your life. But as you get older, they age you, they create chronic disease, and they actually facilitate cancer. So to me, they're fat.
What they are?
Yeah. So, you know, if you look back when you were 10 years old, your cells are dividing, you're growing. Suddenly there's an error in cell division. So there's a genetic mutation, or maybe you got exposed to a carcinogen. Okay. Your body is incredibly brilliant and it recognizes that. And it could either have the cell commit suicide, which is apoptosis, or it can pull what I call the emergency brake, which is it can make the cell become senescent. And in that case, it stops dividing. Because once it stops dividing, it can't grow into a tumor. So for you and I, and probably everyone you know, that happened many times when we were young. And so we have these senescent cells. So at that time, that was great. Stop cancer in its tracks. But the challenge is that they secrete things. They sit there and they're like an angry old man, and they secrete all these molecules that cause other cells around them to become senescent, that raise inflammation in your body. They pump out growth factors that can take something which is precancerous and turn it into a tumor. So it's really fascinating. So, I mean, the other way you would get them in your body, another way would be, you know, you were running on the beach and you sliced your foot open on a shell when you were 17. And your body, again, sees all those pathogens that are rushing into the wound. And immediately, a large number of cells become senescent. And they help drive the healing process. They pump out growth factors, which, you know, that's why they're problematic from a cancer perspective. They dump out all these inflammatory molecules to bring in the immune cells to kill all the pathogens and so on. So senescent cells when you're young are one of the best inventions of all time. And they would be passed along because they're going to get you to reproductive age so you can have children. But the challenge is, since they turn off the kill switch, the apoptosis, and they never die, as they build up in your body, they really seem to drive chronic disease and aging and cancer. So there's a bunch of pharmaceutical companies, they're working on compounds that will preferentially kill off senescent cells. And it's fascinating. There's a huge amount of work done in animals, and then there's some work done in humans. But if you look at the next 10 years, you're going to hear about senescent cells and senolytic drugs. That's going to be a big thing. They're not all going to work, but to me, it's fascinating. And I take a number of different natural compounds which have senolytic activity because I don't want to wait 2, 5, 7, 10 years for these drugs to be commercialized. So I'm always, once I understand the molecular mechanism, then I say, what can I do today to help my situation? So,
okay. So,
I'm going to be quiet and let you ask questions.
No. I mean, no.
Yeah.
Just, to understand. So we are a child, we are young, we run on the beach, we slice our foot open. These senescent cells are a mechanism that helps us. Then it happens again. We play, we fall off the ledge, we get a cut, we get a this, we get a that. And by the time we get to a certain age, let's say age 50, I'm just making up a number here.
Yes.
We have encountered X times that the body made cells become senescent cells. And
yes.
Now, when we are 50, all these X places in our body where these cells reside, because they're still there, now it starts to be something that is something we do not want. In an ideal world, we would like to get rid of them. And that's when you say, the senolytic drug. Now, you said the senolytic drugs, anyway, we are not a big fan of drugs, but you said you're using things. Now, obviously, if you talk about stuff that you use, we are not going to look at it as a recommendation. We don't make any medical claims. People should always check with their doctors. Nevertheless, to be useful, can you tell us about some of the things that you're using?
Sure. And just to reiterate your point, just to be clear, I'm a scientist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a physician. I don't provide medical advice, but I do want to review the scientific literature, try to find those things that I think are really game changers, understand it, and then translate it. So anything that we talk about, it may or may not be right for you. You have to run it by your physician, your medical provider, and make sure that it's right for you. Even water, if you drink too much water, can kill you. You have to know your situation before you know what's right for you. And I hate to see when people make generalized recommendations, because it's only right for some subset of the population. So yeah, very true. And that was, you restated that nicely in terms of the senescent cells. If for your readers, if they're interested, you can go on YouTube. Dr. Judith Campese is a really, exceptional researcher in this field. And I think Dr. James Kirkland, who's an MD, PhD at the Mayo Clinic, again, has done exceptional work in this space. There's a lot of other people, I don't want to bury you, but it's interesting though, that something that helps you survive when you're young actually seems to facilitate cancer when you get old, and also facilitate chronic disease. And Adiel, there's actually two approaches that they take. One approach is to figure out how the senescent cell has turned off its kill switch, and then to turn it back on, because it's almost like they are putting out this poison gas to your other cells that either turns them into zombie cells or makes them highly inflammatory, but it doesn't affect the cell itself. So one approach is the senolytic agents, where they turn that off. It's like going in, if they have a gas mask, and cutting the hose, and so now they die too. And then the other approach is to try to block some of the things that they're releasing. So sometimes if they're releasing something which is inflammatory, you can't kill them, but you can mitigate the effect of what they're releasing. So there are, I like the approach of killing the senescent cells, because let's just say somebody has knee arthritis. There's a ton of senescent cells pumping out all these inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6, all these molecules that are just causing your knee to be swollen and painful. If you could go in and treat them and knock out the senescent cells, you can have this huge impact. And it's not that you have to take it for the rest of your life. It could be that you could get away doing it once a year, or maybe once every 3 years, or something like that. So the other thing which is tricky about them is, I call it the compound interest effect. And that is because senescent cells, when they release things, can cause other cells to become senescent. It's like compound interest. And you know how that curve works. It goes along and it's really slow, really slow, really slow. But all of a sudden it starts ramping up. And because more cells produce more of this noxious brew, and you create more senescent cells, when that happens, it's really bad for us. So
John,
I like both approaches, but I like the approach of killing them off.
Yeah, but nevertheless, I don't mean to belabor the point, but again, I'm listening to you. I'm a curious wannabe user of these useful things that you're using. I would like to reiterate once again that absolutely you're only talking about what you are using for yourself.
Yes.
I need to check with my doctor, but nevertheless, I'm going to say, can you tell us a few of the things that you are using? And I'll check them out. But if I can use a couple of them, that'll be a great thing.
Yeah. Well, without talking about any commercial products, because there are formulas that are out there. One of the products that I take has quercetin, which is interesting because that is also has some other benefits in the body. So it's a polyphenol. You find it in apples and onions and in grape skins and so on. So quercetin is one of the compounds that's been used in many of these studies on senolytic agents, and it certainly has senolytic activity. There's another polyphenol which is found in strawberries, fisetin, which also seems to have, it's fisetin with an F. We can put it in the show notes, but and that also is a very interesting molecule as a natural compound that has a really good tox profile that seems to have senolytic agents. I'm not pushing it, but there's even a Facebook group on that particular molecule. So you can join that if you want to follow what other people are doing. And then there are other molecules which seem to have anti-inflammatory effects. But I really don't want to, I feel like one of the reasons why I'm credible in this space is I never connect myself to anything that's commercial. I'm not trying to sell something. I find it hard to listen to people if every time they talk to me at the end, they want me to buy something. So I try to be really careful in that space.
Exactly. That's why
But,
I, though, am grasping to learn from you, because I know that about you. You just go to the science. You just go to what is useful and you use it yourself. And I'm saying, hey, I want some of that too. So yeah, absolutely. So you talked about quercetin, ficitin. I assume it's F as in Frank, ISSITIN. And then Facebook group.
It's FIS. So Frank, Ingrid, Sam, ETIN. So ficitin, FISETIN.
Okay.
And again, it's all over the web if you look into it. But you know, when I talk to a lot of people, and I'd say 1 or 2 people out of 100 have heard about senescent cells and senolytic agents. But I'm telling you, it's going to be big. No, don't get me wrong. A lot of the clinical trials in humans will fail because not only do you have to kill them off, but you have to get the right agent for the right type of senescent cell. So if they have a gas mask and your agent works via a different mechanism, it may not affect them. And oftentimes they will use multiple agents to try to get an effect that's more broad. But the data in animals is breathtaking. You will be stunned when you dig into this. And then there's also a lot of good data in humans. So to me, I'm excited about it. So that would be the first area that I would say you should really dig into that area and pay attention. I just gave a talk to my membership about that a month ago, and people were like, oh my God, I can't believe I've never heard of this. And trust me, you will be hearing a lot about senescent cells and senolytic agents.
So quercetin is something that I was introduced to in the context of allergies. If I had a certain form of allergy or felt something like that, my nutritionist recommended quercetin. I can see why it's connected here because allergies is sort of an inflammatory response, but this is really useful. Now, I'm going to ask you a bit of a philosophical question just for you to
Sure.
kind of, from the description of how senescent cells come to be, I wonder, what's the logic? I mean, our bodies seem to be a masterpiece of efficiency, creation, logic, amazing thought. If you can call it thought, it's amazing. Why don't they get killed? Why isn't there a mechanism, you call it, apoptosis, that'll get the cells, let's say, once again, you're a kid, slice your foot on the beach, these cells come to be, now it's all done. Why doesn't the body, this is just very philosophical, kill those cells right there and then?
No, it's a great question. And just so you know, senescent cells can be killed by the body, and your natural killer cells can kill them, and that's what happens. It's just over time, they build up faster than they're getting killed off. And as you get older, your immune function drops, you're less able to kill them, and then the existing ones are creating other ones. That's why they don't really start kicking in for most people until they get into their 60s. But if you think about it, if you could clean them up when in your late 40s or 50s and never have it happen, the reason why we haven't evolved to get rid of them is your body is designed to get you to reproductive age healthy and to have offspring. And if that happens, then there's no, to your body, there's no benefit for having healthy 80, 90, and 100-year-olds because you're beyond reproductive age generally. And, there's no benefit. So that's why we haven't evolved to get rid of them. But your body does have your immune cells can dock and can lyse those cells, rip them open and spill their guts out. And that's what's supposed to happen. But it's just a matter of over time, they build up. And so that's why it kind of works the way it does. It's not that your body's trying to kill you. It's that your body's trying to propagate the species, and it wants to make sure that you make it to reproductive age.
Actually, that's an even deeper philosophical point that I think what you say is so true, that nature, or whatever we want to call it, God, whatever, the real key, the real goal is to get you to reproduce. Once you reproduce, you are dispensable. In fact, by hanging around, you are hogging the resources of the young people who can reproduce. You should just go already. You did your job, you reproduced. That's an interesting thing. That's how nature seems to work. So when we talk about anti-aging, and we talk about, aging in reverse and getting younger, we are actually going against the natural tide in a way, aren't we?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we're going against it. I would just say that it's an optional thing. Once somebody has made it till 40, it doesn't necessarily, it's an optional thing for the body to keep you alive. And so we have to maybe jump in and help facilitate the process. So whereas if you cut your foot on the beach and you got an infection and that infection took your life, now if you didn't have those senescent cells, you probably weren't going to live long enough to reproduce. And I didn't mention this, but on the cancer side, there are people that have mutations where they can't make their cells become senescent. And it happens in humans and it happens in mice. And here's the sad part. All the humans and all the mice all die young from cancer. So if you didn't have that mechanism, you wouldn't have made it to the age where you could actually reproduce. So that's why we all have it, because it saves you when you're young. And that's what that's the intelligence of the body trying to get you to that point where you can reproduce. But at the same, and it secretes all these proteolytic agents to remodel the tissue and help with the wound healing. But when you're older, the growth factors and the proteolytic agents and the inflammatory molecules, all three of those are like plant food for cancers. And some of the work has shown that you can have a precancerous cell, and if you add those three things to it, then you can turn it into a tumor. And that's, again, as you get older, your cancer risk goes up substantially. And a lot of that is being driven by this, these senescent cells. So, kind of interesting thing. Hey, I wanted to, there's one other area that I want to make sure we at least touch upon. And because preventing damage is fundamental. If you want to slow aging and maximize health span, you have to figure out how are you damaging the body and then do less of that. So that's a given. But the cool part is your skin's constantly repairing itself. Your body is constantly repairing itself. And it also has cellular cleanup. Everyone talks about detox. And a lot of the detox things that I see, I don't know how good the science is behind those. But your body has a process called autophagy. So autophagy or autophagy. And that's your cellular detox. And there was a Japanese researcher, he won the 2016 Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discoveries around cellular autophagy and some of the mechanisms behind it. And that is a magical thing to get rid of all the misfolded proteins, all the cellular junk, the defective mitochondria. So I always tell people, autophagy is like having these little Pac-Men that run around your cells that gobble up all the junk. And not only do they gobble it up, they then digest it back to the individual Legos and they use it to build new stuff. So it's this it's an incredible process. And you think, wow, I hope that happens every day in my body. Autophagy only happens when you've fasted for a reasonable amount of time. You have to turn down mTOR, the mechanistic target of rapamycin. So we won't get into what that is, but mTOR is the factory foreman that says, what are we going to do today in the cell? Are we going to build, make a bunch of new proteins and make a bunch of new stuff, or make new muscles? Are we going to grow, or are we going to shut down the factory and let these little Pac-Men run through and get rid of all the defective mitochondria, the misfolded proteins, all the cellular junk? But unfortunately for most Americans, you know, you finish your last meal at 7 p.m., hopefully. You go to bed at 10. It's now 7 a.m. when you wake up. Autophagy may be just starting to ramp up in your body because there's no protein coming in, no amino acids, and there's no carbohydrate, there's no glucose. When those two things happen, mTOR looks at the situation and says, shut down the factory, let's clean up, because we have no new parts to build proteins and we have no glucose. But most Americans at 7 in the morning put a couple teaspoons of sugar in their coffee. They have a Danish, they have some cereal, and they shut it down. So that's one of the reasons I believe that intermittent fasting or time-restricted eating is such a powerful strategy. So to me, my last meal was last night, and I finished about 8 p.m. I haven't had my first meal of the day yet. I'm on Eastern time, so it's 1:42. But I want to keep autophagy running until noon or 1 o'clock or sometimes 2 o'clock, because I want to do that cellular cleanup. I don't want to end up with Parkinson's. I don't want to end up with Alzheimer's. I don't want to end up with dysfunctional mitochondria where the sparks are flying out of them and damaging the mitochondria and my cells. So the cool part is when you have a bad mitochondria in your body, so the mitochondria is plural and the mitochondrion is singular. When you have a bad one, it makes a lot of free radicals. And the body tags it, puts a Post-it note on and says, this needs to be recycled. But only when autophagy happens, where those Pac-Men gobble it up, is when you have that recycling. And that's called mitophagy. So I want to have my mitochondria, just doing great and not dumping out free radicals. I want to recycle the defective ones, and I want to clone the ones that are working beautifully, because mitochondria divide to create new ones. And so I want to put the pressure on my body, sometimes doing cryotherapy, sometimes doing interval training or whatever. I want to push my mitochondria so the bad ones get flagged. And then I want to do some fasting to clean those up. So, to me, those are fundamental strategies. One, to delay aging and chronic disease, meaning getting rid of the senescent cells. And then the second one is, how can I clean up and get rid of all this garbage? Because misfolded proteins lead to neurological disease. And, bad mitochondria age you and limit your energy and limit your vitality. So I'm going to be quiet again and let you ask some follow-up questions.
So John, we know about intermittent fasting and we talked about it, and what you're saying makes so much sense. And I think luckily the notion of intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding is getting to be much more widespread than it was before. But since you're mentioning it, since we're talking about it, what would be an interval where you reap a lot of benefits? So some people talk about 12-12, meaning you eat all your food within a 12-hour period. Some people talk about 14, and 10.
14-10, sure, yeah.
Some people talk about 16-8. 16-8, by the way, is what I do. 16-8. So I eat all my food between noon, and 8 p.m.
Yes.
And then I don't eat again. That's 16-8. Some people say throw in 1 day a week of 20-4. Like the guy, the warrior guy. What are the numbers that you have seen work for you and for others?
Yeah, and I guess what I'd say scientifically, the answer's not in yet. There are people that are working on it, but no one can say definitively what the right timing is. I personally like to eat all my food within an 8-hour window, and sometimes I bring it down to a 6-hour window. So I guess that's, So what is 24/8? Yeah, so 16/8 or
18.
18/6, whatever. Yeah, the math's hard for me right now, I guess, because I haven't had food. So, and then there are other people that think that occasionally you need to do a longer fast. Some people like to do alternate day fasting, where they eat regular on one day, eat 3 meals a day, and then on other days they don't eat anything at all. And I think over the next 5 years, scientifically, we'll get the answer. But I know for myself, when I went to, the 18/8, I got leaner. I mean, I lost that layer of fat that I had around my midsection. It really changed my metabolism. And so I'd say, to me, I know that works. The one thing I think people have to keep in mind is it's not that you can't eat anything in the morning when you wake up. The trick is no amino acids, which means no protein, and no carbohydrate or sugar. Those are the two things that will break your fast. But if you make a cup of coffee with some short chain fat, I like the 8 carbon fat, and maybe a little bit of grass-fed ghee to get it to all emulsify, there's no protein and there's no carbohydrate. So your body says, oh, I'm still fasting. It looks just like what you're introducing, looks just like the molecules that are being released from your fat cells, or sometimes the short chain stuff is processed differently by your liver, produces the ketones and the beta hydroxybutyrate that you run on beautifully. I couldn't not eat, but that cup of coffee with those short chain fats, it makes it easy for me to go to 12 or 1 or sometimes 2 in the afternoon before I eat.
For more helpful videos like this, join my free community at adielgorel.com or click the link below.